Welcome to the final episode of the Fair Game podcast, where we explore discrimination in sports. I am your host Peter Potyok, and today we'll be looking at misogyny, something that has become popular amongst men online who look down upon women and women's sport. Misogyny in sport is not new, but it is becoming more visible, especially in the digital age. Female athletes are not only judged for their performances, but also their appearances, their behavior, and even their right to compete. Social media has amplified these issues, giving a platform to voices that often go unchecked. Recent data highlights just how serious the problem has become. Reports of sexism and misogyny have risen by 67% during the 24-25 season, with sexist online content rising by 72%. This isn't just background noise, it affects confidence, performance, and mental health. Nearly 2/3 of elite British female athletes have experienced sexism, showing that this is not limited to isolated incidents, but instead a widespread issue across all levels of sport. Beyond online abuse, sexism also takes more harmful forms. Sexual misconduct and harassment, ranging from inappropriate comments to physical abuse, remain pervasive in many sporting environments. To back that statement, in January 2026, Spark Team Communications released findings from a study into experiences of sexual misconduct by women working in UK elite sports, which showed that out of 260 respondents, 88% were targets of at least one form of sexual misconduct, while 87% had experienced at least one form of sexual harassment behavior. These experiences can often go unreported due to fear of backlash, damage to careers, or a lack of trust in the reporting systems. To understand how these barriers are being challenged, it's important to look at individuals who are breaking new ground. One example is Mary-Louise Etter, who became the first female head coach in Europe's top 5 leagues when she took over as the interim coach at Bundesliga side Union Berlin. Her presence on the sideline is not just symbolic, it challenges long-standing assumptions about who belongs in positions of authority in sport. Throughout her short tenure of 5 games, the team flourished under her management, collecting 7 points out of a possible 15 to comfortably escape relegation. When the team lost against Wolfsburg and RB Leipzig, social media flooded with misogynistic comments saying things like "women out of sport" and "to the kitchen please." This shows that football is still not a fully welcome place for women. But curiously, when Union won their final 2 games of the season, there were little to no hate comments. Why? Because they couldn't hate on the female coach. Many people have come out in support of the German, including Bayern Munich manager Vincent Kompany, who said,
"It's easy to minimize and say, yes, she's just a coach like everybody else, and of course, I think that's how we have to treat her as colleagues. But in the end, it's something special, and it's something that behind it opens a lot of opportunity to little girls who are now maybe playing football and thinking, hey, maybe I can coach anywhere. I can make a real career in this game and be successful like what I'm seeing on TV. And I think those stories, they're really important.
Etter's achievement represents progress, but it also highlights how rare such opportunities are. Women in coaching, leadership, and decision-making roles remain significantly underrepresented. Her success shows what is possible, but it also raises the questions why there aren't more examples like her. I had the opportunity to sit down with women's football enthusiast Ashley Follows to discuss the treatment of women's sport, how perception has changed, and what could be done to fight sexism. Have a listen. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Ashley Follows. I'm a women's sports enthusiast. I'm probably women's football fan the most, but I do love things like the rugby, which I've got into a bit more recently, athletics, things like that, netball, anything women's sports I love, but football is my main one.
How has the media's treatment of women's football changed over time?
I think the media's treatment of women's football has changed massively over time. The first major tournament I remember watching was the Women's World Cup in 2015. And like barely anybody watched that, and England actually won a bronze medal. But I think that was like the kickstart for me in terms of how looking at how the media's treatment has got better. Obviously, you have places like Sky now and BBC which have the Women's Super League, but Sky is mainly the home of the Women's Super League, which I think is absolutely incredible. The Women's World Cup, you get, and Women's Euros, you get coverage on BBC, ITV, Channel 4 get the England women games as well sometimes. So I do think it's changed massively, and I think it's only ever going to improve, as well as not just women's football. I think all the other women's sports are going to continue to grow on the media, in terms of being in the media. And I think the treatment's actually been quite well, considering they've broadcast it and it's got record viewing, speaks for itself. And the England women have won back-to-back European Championships, and obviously the Women's World Cup is next year. So it'd be interesting to see how big that coverage will be, because obviously England women deserve all the praise that they get anyway for what they've done for women's football as a whole. So I definitely think the treatment has got better, and I think it's just going to keep growing further and further and further the more the game continues to grow.
What kinds of sexist assumptions still shape coverage of women's sport?
In terms of sexual assumptions, I think there'll always be sexual assumptions still there. Of course, some of the sexual assumptions is the coverage of women's sport, like how come it's an all-women punditry and presenter, whereas like on the men's, we now have male presenters or female presenters who've done it for years, but then we always have to have a woman pundit as such. Say like Izzy Christiansen comes to mind, Steph Houghton. In the past, Karen Carney still does it now actually, but Karen Carney, Eniola Aluko, we've always had women on the men's football side of things predominantly over the last few years, whereas sometimes, even though on the women you do get a lot of men, especially Ian Wright, who's a big advocate for women's football as a whole, but I just think in terms of the sexism that's still there, 100%, there is always that element of it all being a female presenting crew, punditry, etc. And there'll always be sexist views, like I'm 100% certain of that. I don't think anything will ever change, and I still think it shapes it in a way, but ultimately, if you're talking about England, regardless if you're men's or women's team, like you're always going to be an England fan and support your country. So at the end of the day, you can be sexist all you want, you know, it's England, we're going to cheer them on, we want them to win a major tournament, and that's the main thing that I take away. It's always going to be there, but yeah, it's just one of those things really, I suppose. But as I say, they're probably the only assumptions, and obviously you still have the people, I've just thought of this as well, you still have the people who say that a women's job's in the kitchen and all of this that still exists. I think there's always going to be hard to change everybody's opinion on the women's game as a whole, but hopefully it is moving in the right direction and people are starting to get on board with the Lionesses. You see a lot more men taking their children to women's games and going to women's games themselves and just enjoying the atmosphere, and you even see men with the women's players' names on the back of their shirts now, which is crazy, because when I was younger it was always just the men's players on the back of shirts. Like I had Michael Owen when I was growing up, and Steven Gerrard, people like that. So it's nice to see the men going for women's names instead of always having men's players on the back of their shirts.
What changes would make football culture more welcoming for the women's fans?
If you mean football culture in terms of the men's game, I think the changes that could be done is like fans having more initiatives, so like fan groups. Like I'm part of a Wolves fan group called Girls in Old Gold, which is an all-female Wolves supporters group that is designed to help women feel safe and have a voice and stuff at football games, because obviously men sometimes, where I've been in the past and things like that, will say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, blah 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 blah. So I think that's one thing, a way that changes could be done. More teams get these so-called all women fan groups and supporters groups, just to make women feel appreciated and that they have got a voice, like they're not. Because a lot of the time what women actually say about the game, like for someone as passionate as I am, we're not wrong. It's just the fact that it's coming out of a woman's voice instead of a man's voice that we get like shadowed about it or like criticised for it. So I think that would be what changes I think could be done. Also maybe working with teams like Premier League teams, Championship, whatever it may be, work with these clubs, and the clubs can work with the fans to like make them feel a bit more safe and supported. And in terms of like the women's culture, to welcome like women fans, I think they're quite welcoming anyway. It's quite like a relaxed atmosphere at the women's games. It's not like intense. There's no real like chanting at the referee or anything like that. So I'd say that would probably be the only real change for there. Would just be just to keep doing what they're doing or change things slightly, maybe make it a little bit more inclusive for men. I don't know. But in terms of the whole football culture being more welcoming for women fans, I'd say definitely do what like the likes. I think Brentford have done it. I could be wrong. I think, but obviously I'm part of the Wolves one, and we're doing like a really good job. We have like podcasts where it's an all girl panel and stuff. So anything like that, just to make it a bit more welcoming for women fans, as obviously I know it can be daunting going to a game sometimes with the men who overly criticise you or go mad at you for having your own opinion.
What progress have you seen in terms of fighting sexism, and what could be done to do more?
In terms of fighting sexism, obviously I've seen you have Her Game Too, which is like a really, really good organisation that was set up, and it's spreaded across loads of the teams across England now. So that helps fight sexism, and kind of what I said before, having these all-female fan groups where, you know, people can feel a bit more appreciated. I don't think sexism will ever be able to be stopped because everyone's entitled to their own opinion and they can say and do what they like. So I think there has been terms of fighting it, and obviously people can report it to the clubs or report it to the relevant stewards or something like that on the day of a game, and they deal with it there and then, kind of thing. But maybe having, I think what I'd like to see, we have the Kick It Out campaign and the Say No to Racism campaign from the Premier League and things like that. Maybe a No to Sexism campaign or something like that, where the female clubs like Man City Women, any of the Women's Super League clubs and the Premier League clubs who've got like counterparts, they all, or same as the Championship, anything, come together and just have like a big thing about no to sexism, like, and make everybody feel welcome. It's part of football clubs, like a community. When you support a team, it's like a community to you. So I guess for me, it's like just make sure they keep doing that, and maybe, as I say, do a big group thing, get all the women players, all the men's players together, and just make it feel a bit more welcoming in terms of that aspect. So that would probably be what I've seen and what more could be done to help tackle the sexism even more going forward.
What gives you hope that attitudes could keep changing?
I think in terms of what gives me hope that the attitudes could keep changing, I think probably the way that people are being brought up now, by like their parents and stuff, where a lot of the sexism comes from, I'm not trying to be horrible here, but comes from like older men, people who would never probably go and watch a women's game. But I think because more kids are being inspired now to go and watch the women's game, go to women's games with their dad and whatever, like their parents or their families or whatever it may be, I think that's having a big that's giving me hope that the attitudes are going to keep changing going forward. As I kind of said before, I don't think they'll ever be eliminated, because I just think there's always people out there who will be against it in some way, but that's giving me the hope. And obviously, as I touched on, all the clubs are getting like their own women's fan groups just for women supporters, which I think is massive as well, because it gives them a platform to share their opinions and give their voices without being judged or being like, you know, having sexist comments made to them or about them as well. So they're the two things that are giving me the most hope.
What could people do if they see or hear sexism in sport, whether at a match, online, or in the media?
I think people should just report it. Even if it doesn't really have an impact, just report it. You never know who could potentially see the report. Or it's easier said than done, but I've had sexist comments before when I was like doing some sports journalism things, when I was studying sports journalism, or when I was in the press box a couple of times. I was lucky enough to do women's football, so it wasn't too bad, but I had like sexist comments on Twitter before, or X should I say. It's easier said than done, but just ignore it. At the end of the day, the way I got told when I was a journalist is you're in a higher position than them. So, they're just jealous that, say, like you're going back to Wolves because it's my team. If I'm a Wolves correspondent and as a woman and they're being sexist towards me, I just try and remember that you're in a higher position than them. You're getting information that they want to know as fans. So they're just jealous that you're in that position. So, but just in general, if you hear it in sport, whether at a match, whether it be playing yourself, online, at a match that you're attending, or in the media, just report it. You might think that it's nothing, or you might think reporting it will do nothing, but it actually does. There's so many incidents now where it gets reported, and social media sites especially are like looking into it a bit more. So just keep reporting it, just keep letting it go in one ear and out the other, even though, as I say, it's easier said than done. But I think people who are being sexist are just hiding behind a screen, or they're just jealous of like the position that you're in, or just ultimately they know that you're right, they just don't like the fact that it's coming out of a woman's mouth. So just report it, keep positive, and at the end of the day, you're entitled to your opinion regardless if you're a man or a woman. So at the end of the day, just keep saying it, keep voicing your opinions on whatever it may be, and keep, pushing positive things for women's sport, women's fans as a whole, and hopefully the sexism will go down over the years and we'll see campaigns, more female groups, fan groups, more female pundits, fans, presenters, all that kind of thing being involved in the women's game, and maybe even the men's game going forward a lot more as well. So yeah, just keep positive, keep reporting it if it affects you, and try and let it go in one ear and out the other.
As we end this series, it is important to remember that sport has the power to unite, inspire, and challenge society. It brings people together across cultures, backgrounds, and beliefs, creating moments that can define generations. But for that to be true for everyone, it must also be a space where respect and equality are non-negotiable. That means not only calling out discrimination when we see it, but actively working to change the systems and attitudes that allow it to continue. Progress depends on all of us, from fans and athletes to coaches and organizations. Recognizing fairness in sport is not just about the game itself, but about the people who make it possible. Only then can sport truly live up to its promise as a level playing field for all. I'm Peter Potyok, and this has been the Fair Game Podcast, the podcast that asks tough questions about who gets to play, who gets to be heard, who gets to belong. Thank you for listening, and keep fighting for a game that's fair for everyone.